Good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to be here, speaking to bankers. My sister's actually a banker. She works at EcoBank. I've always thought of bankers as boring people, but last night changed my mind. I've been working with mountain gorillas for a very long time. I've been working with mountain gorillas for a very long time, 30 years, coming to 30 years, since I went as a vet student in 1994. And it's been a very interesting journey. I've learned so much about myself, actually, from our closest cousins, who we share 98.4% genetic material. So the only primates that are closer to us are the chimpanzees, which is 98.8. They say that chimpanzees is what we are and gorillas is what we want to be. And I'll explain that to you in the presentation. I've been very fortunate to have received a number of awards because of our unique approach to conservation, which I'm going to talk to you about. I found that you can't really protect the gorillas without helping their human neighbors. And I was truly honored to win the Taubag Award, and also in 2022, and to become an Ashoka Fellow in 2007 for merging Uganda's wildlife management and rural public health programs to create common resources for people and animals. Proud to be a National Geographic Explorer, and speaking of diseases, I was on the WHO scientific, I was selected to be on the WHO Scientific Advisory Group for Origin of Novel Pathogens, which happened during the COVID pandemic because of a lot of the work we did during COVID. Oh yes, I've seen the screen. I have to say that this is my second time to present at the GABV conference. The first time was during the COVID pandemic. Tom Cummings asked me to present during the COVID pandemic. I actually wrote a book about my conservation journey, and I mention it in this book. I had COVID during the time that I presented. And I was stuck in Burundi because we had gone to train some veterinarians, and I couldn't fly back, and I was so depressed, and I was getting worse and worse. But what uplifted me was having the opportunity to present at the GABV. So now I'm really excited that you're here in my country, Uganda, and I'm ready and presenting here. I'm here with my husband, Zikusoka, who's also a co-founder of CTPH. And we also, one of our co-founders, Stephen Rubanga, is at the office right now. We also have Cosmas, who's just joined, our communications manager. Tom told me to tell stories, so I am. I'm going to talk about how I became a conservationist. That's me, I think, at 5 months old. I was on my mother's shoulder, and I was lucky, I would say maybe to be the last born, because I was the last born in a family of 6. And by the time my parents had me, they just let me do whatever I want. They were like, even if what she does doesn't earn a living, a good living, her older siblings will look after her. So I was able to follow my passion and become a wildlife veterinarian and conservationist. My dad was one of the ministers in the first government after independence in the 1960s, and he was Minister of Works and Housing and later Commerce and Industry. But in that photograph, President Obote, who was the first president after Uganda gained independence, used to send him to lead goodwill missions to other countries. Having gained independence from the British, Uganda turned to the east for support, and he was in China at that time leading a goodwill mission. So that's one of the last photographs, sadly, taken of my dad as a whole family. You can see that's the whole family, and as the baby in the photograph. My dad was one of the first people who was killed by President Idi Amin when he came into power, because he was threatened by people in the previous government. This left a very large dent on the family. I was only 2 years old, so I don't really remember him. But all of us felt that we wanted to continue his dream of a prosperous Uganda. My mom got into politics and was one of the first female politicians in the country, encouraging many women to join politics. And all of us have followed his dream, and I did it through my passion for wildlife. Why am I showing you a monkey? This monkey taught me a lot about primates. I grew up with a lot of pets at home, and my elder brother, who's in the photograph, previous photo, was 10 years older than me, used to like bringing stray cats and dogs home. So they became my friends, and I got attached to them. And I felt like I wanted to be a veterinary doctor. But we had next door neighbors. The Cuban ambassador to Uganda was living nearby, across the road, and they always used to come. They were friends with my mom, him and his wife. They always used to come and offer her support, you know, like comfort, and I got to know them. They were her friends. And they had a monkey called Poncho. Vervet monkeys are very common in Uganda. In fact, you might even see them in Munyonyo in the trees. They're not endangered, like the mountain gorillas. But Poncho used to come home, pull the cats and dogs' tails, steal food from the kitchen. He was a very naughty monkey. But one time I was practicing the piano, and I felt like I wasn't alone. And any of you who've been near wildlife or worked with wildlife know that feeling. And I noticed that Poncho was watching me. So I wanted to see what he would do. So I went out of the room, I think I was around 8 or 9, and he sat down on the stool and played one note with one finger. And I was like, what? So this monkey can actually, not only do his fingers and fingernails look like mine, but he can actually play the piano. So ever since then, I became fascinated by primates. So at the age of 18, I had the opportunity to set up a wildlife club in my high school, Chibuli Secondary School in Uganda, and that was a turning point in my life. I was also really honored to receive probably my first award, Senior 6 Sciences Award. I'm glad that Tom kind of said, I started as a scientist and I'll always be a scientist. During that time, we took the children to Queen Elizabeth National Park to visit the animals, and it was a turning point in my life. If you see those stickers, I got my mom to lend me money to develop those stickers. I haven't paid her back yet. But we went to Queen Elizabeth National Park at the time when there was very little wildlife, because during the Idi Amin era, a lot of animals were poached, especially when the Tanzanian army came to overthrow the country to help Uganda. They ate a lot of animals. And so the elephants are very clever. They moved to Democratic Republic of Congo. So there was hardly any wildlife in the park. There were no lions because there was not much to eat. So they allowed us to walk through the park. They said you can have a walking safari, which was very exciting, but because nothing could eat us. But it was also depressing and disappointing because I didn't see much wildlife. So while we were there with the students, now I was heading the wildlife club, I thought, why don't I become a vet who also works with wildlife? So, and also during that time, the warden came to the wildlife club offices and said, we have mountain gorillas in Uganda. And I was like, wow, I would like to go and visit the mountain gorillas in Uganda. And he said to me, you can't really visit them because they are not yet habituated. How did he find out that we had mountain gorillas? The first population in the Virungas was discovered at the beginning of the century, actually. And the late Dr. Diane Fossey did a first study, long-term study, at Karisoki. So everybody knew about those mountain gorillas. But when they were moving through the forest, here in Bwindi, they found that when they were moving through the Bwindi forest, they came across night nests. Gorillas build nests every night and defecate in them as they get up in the morning. And when they took the samples and analyzed them in California, they found out that they were actually exactly the same as the ones in the Virungas. And you can imagine how that happened. At one point, these two forests were connected. It's actually a very short distance, just about 50 kilometers. between, okay, I do it here. Yes, between these two populations, it's just around 50 kilometers, between the Virungas and Bwindi. It's not actually a very long distance, but at one point, these two forests connected. But because of road infrastructure and building up in the area, they're no longer connected. And that's how the mountain gorilla population split into two very tiny populations. And so I was really excited. I was like, I want to go and see them. He says, they're not yet habituated. This was 1987. So when I was a vet student in London, I got an opportunity to study at the Royal Vet College, University of London. I got to work with animals of my choice. I couldn't work with the mountain gorillas yet, but I worked with the chimpanzees in Entebbe Zoo. I hope some of you will have an opportunity to visit the Entebbe Zoo on your way out. And I also learned a lot about primates because these were victims of the bushmeat trade. Their parents were eaten in Congo, and they were too small to eat. Too small to eat, so they tried to sell them, and a lot of them ended up in Uganda, in the zoo. But because these cages were very flimsy at the time, there was very little funding, these chimpanzees used to escape from the cages and run around when you were not looking. And that taught me how intelligent they were and how much they missed their mothers, because they liked being hugged to bring them back in. And this particular time, Jane Goodall Institute was supporting the chimpanzees. So then I got to study them in Budongo Forest under Professor Vernon Reynolds. Budongo Forest is in northwest Uganda, and there I learned also a lot about chimpanzees. Finally, 2 years later, I got to Bwindi when they were habituated. This photograph was taken not in Budongo, but Bwindi, because sadly, when I got to Bwindi, I got a very bad cold. And when you have a cold, you're not allowed to visit the gorillas because we can easily make them sick. So that photograph was taken when I went for a walk to the waterfall, as I wanted to get better, but I couldn't get close to the gorillas. And that's something you can do. When you come to Bwindi and you come with children under the age of 15, they can go to the waterfall while you go to the gorillas. So finally, when I got to go to the gorillas, I understood fully how we can make them sick. So this is my first mountain gorilla. It's not a very nice photograph, but it's an emotional one because that's the first mountain gorilla I ever saw. And I've never left. And when I got to see Kachipira, he was on his own. He had a broken hand because when they were habituating them for tourism, they found that he already had an injury that hadn't healed. And he was very, very accommodating. So Kachipira means broken hand in Ruchiga. He was very, very accommodating. He just stared at us. We could get 5 meters as close as him. The rest of the group couldn't be found that day, which is very unusual. But what really struck me is how accommodating Kachipira was, how he was willing to let us in his home. And I looked into his eyes and felt a very deep connection. And I felt we really need to protect the gorillas because they're very vulnerable. And yet at that time, there were only about 300 left in the whole world in Bwindi. So my research study involved collecting fecal samples from their night nests to check for parasites that they have. And I found that the 2 tourist groups had a higher parasite burden than the 1 research group. And I attributed this to tourism, maybe due to stress. And I kind of felt, I think I need to come back here full time. So I wrote to Dr. Edroma, the head of Uganda National Parks, who gave me permission to do this study under the supervision of Dr. Liz McPhee, who was heading International Gorilla Conservation Program, which was an NGO that was setting up tourism in the park. And I said to him, I want to be your first veterinarian. This is what a veterinary doctor does for wildlife. I wrote that letter from UK. 2 months later, he wrote back and said, your job is waiting for you. So I was very excited. And I started. So that's how I became Uganda's first wildlife vet. It was a very exciting job, but very challenging because no one had done it before. So I spent a lot of time explaining to people what a vet does for wildlife, because at the time it was all about natural selection. If 2 gorillas fight or 1 animal is sick, it's natural selection if they don't make it. If a warthog is limping, it's the next meal for the lion, which is fine, that's okay, because the lion will starve. But sometimes if it's human-related or life-threatening, we thought that we had to intervene, especially with animals as endangered as the mountain gorillas. So we came up with all those protocols, and Those are the rangers who I worked with. That's Alfred, a ranger standing behind me. And it was really an exciting time, but people also had to understand why do we treat wild animals and how can we make sure that every single gorilla that can make it, makes it. So you can see how similar gorillas are to us. The mothers carry their babies on their back, just like humans. And they move on their mother's backs until they're like 1-2 years old, and then they can start moving on the ground. When they're just born, they move in the front, then later on they move on the back of their mothers. And that particular gorilla is called Karunji, because she's beautiful. Doesn't she look beautiful? And so one of the first cases I had to deal with was an outbreak, scabies outbreak, sarcoptic mange. They told me that the gorillas were losing hair and developing white scaly skin. So I spoke to a human doctor friend of mine, Dr. Catherine Sozi, who had also been to university in UK, and I asked her, what is the most common skin disease in people? And she said to me, it's scabies. Here in Uganda, low-income groups of people have preventable diseases like scabies, tuberculosis, because of less than adequate hygiene. So I thought to myself, I hope it's scabies, because you can just give 1 dose of ivermectin and they get better, rather than ringworm. So we went to the national park, and this vet in the photograph, Dr. Richard Koch, helped to set up the vet unit in Kenya, Kenya Wildlife Service, and he happened to be in Uganda to try and help me to develop a veterinary needs so that the World Bank could fund veterinary activities in Uganda Wildlife Authority. So I told him, Richard, can you please come with me to Bwindi, because we have an emergency. And he had seen scabies in cheetahs in Masai Mara that were being visited by very many tour vehicles. The ones that weren't visited with many tour vehicles didn't have mange, sarcoptic mange or scabies, but the ones that were visited by many vehicles did. And we attributed it maybe to stress. So when we got there, it was scabies, and that gorilla was scratching even under the anesthetic. And so sadly, this baby gorilla was dropped a few days later because the mother wouldn't allow us to get close to her to treat her. So when we went to treat her, to immobilize her the next day to treat the baby, she had dropped the baby. Normally, gorillas hold on to their babies after they die, but she was so tired of this child that had been sick for a long time. So it lost almost all the hair and had pneumonia. And we started to ask ourselves, where did this come from? Did it come from the local communities? Also dealt with a rectal prolapse in one of the gorillas, and Kahara, and we didn't know whether this came from ranging in community land and picking up human parasites. I treated her, she got better, but we wanted to know what could possibly have happened after doing the surgery. So she recovered from the rectal prolapse operation and went on to, give birth to babies in the forest. But even when I carried out this operation, some people questioned why I should do it, because they said maybe it's bad genes, and I'm promoting bad genes in an already endangered population by saving her life. But no one could prove it was bad genes, and the warden said the tourists are upset, you have to do something. So we went ahead and operated on Kahara. So what we found out is that the gorillas that are habituated for tourism tend to leave the national park and go to the community land in areas where they used to range before their forest habitat was cut. And that's the reason why the gorillas were going into the community land. They like eating bananas, so they came across banana plants. Unfortunately, they destroy the whole plant because they're looking for moisture in the stem. And so this particular photograph, I took it of a farmer whose crop had just been destroyed. And I said to him, do you think gorillas are important? He was very upset. He said, yes, because my children are employed by the park, and some of the money from tourism is shared with the local communities. 20% of the park entry fee and some of the gorilla permit, $10 from the gorilla permit, is shared with the community. But the individual farmer like me, whose crop is destroyed, I'm not being compensated. So he became one of the first members of the human-gorilla conflict team that herds gorillas back to the park when they come out. And so gorillas also like to eat the bark of eucalyptus trees, and they encourage people to plant trees so they don't have to go into the forest to cut wood. And so they're really cute, they're adorable, but the community have to live with them. And how do we help them to coexist with the gorillas? So my One Health journey began when I realized that people are making gorillas sick, and you couldn't just protect the gorillas without improving the health of their human neighbors. And because I was the only vet in the organization at the time, I was tasked to develop a health education program for the local communities. So I developed these brochures with support from a designer in Kampala. We went out to the local communities and spoke to them about how they can make gorillas sick and how we should prevent this. So we hosted a participatory rural appraisal workshop in 1999. I moved together with the community conservation wardens and rangers and the sub-county health assistant. At the time, we didn't realize it was a One Health team, but it was. It had a veterinarian, medical experts, and conservation experts. So when we got to the community, I explained to them how the gorillas picked up diseases, and I was about to tell them how to prevent it. And the ranger touched my arm and said, "Let's hear what they have to say." And they came up with much better suggestions than I was proposing for them, which was very humbling for me as a veterinarian. And I knew that people know what is best for them. They may be poor and marginalized, but they know exactly what's best for them. And a lot of what they proposed is what we used to set up the NGO a few years later. They said that, for example, we need health services to be brought closer. When people get sick, they carry them on those very steep hills on stretchers to the nearest health center. And by that time, they're very sick, if all other methods have failed. They also said that they wanted us to continue the health education. These little boys were supposed to be in school, but they were herding goats just outside the park. So as long as people are poor and not going to school, you can't really break this kind of negative cycle. They also wanted us to strengthen the human-gorilla conflict team. So then, a year later, I got an opportunity to do a zoo medicine residency in North Carolina, and I did a TB study at the Human-Wildlife Livestock Interface as part of my master's, and then I got to understand how the public health system works. So we took samples from buffalo, cattle, people, and also continued to take samples from people. And then we started conservation through public health. And when you get to Bwindi, how many of you have been to Bwindi Impenetrable Forest? How many of you have seen gorillas? Great. I know you saw them in the Virungas. It's a really amazing experience. It's a spiritual experience. So even in the Virungas, it's the same problem. It's a very hard edge between the community and the park. So when it was created as a park, gorillas could come out. If people go in, it's illegal unless it's for tourism or research. And another threat to the gorillas is poaching. Actually, in Uganda and Rwanda, people don't eat gorillas because it was bad luck to look in the eyes of a gorilla when the Batwa who lived in the forest used to avoid them. But if they move over to DRC, which is neighboring Uganda, they can get eaten because in DRC and other countries in Africa, 8 other countries where gorillas are found, it's a culture that if you eat a gorilla or a chimpanzee, you can become as strong as them. So they get caught in snares set for duiker and bush pig, and they also get sick. So this particular gorilla is called Kanyonyi. He's my favorite gorilla, one of my favorites. He was born the year that I started working in the Wildlife Authority, and I operated on his older sister, Kahara, when she had the rectal prolapse. And Kanyonyi grew up seeing tourists all his life. So when he became a big silverback heading his group after his father died, his father was the first silverback to be habituated for tourism, the Mubare group. He used to frighten tourists to see their reaction, and everybody would freak out. But he was just a mischievous silverback. Sadly, Kanyonyi died in 2017, not because of human disease, but because he got into a fight with another silverback, never really recovered, fell off a tree, never really recovered, and when he died, in spite of treatment, he couldn't get better. I shared a post on Facebook, and we had over 300 shares. Everybody was remembering their experiences and photos with Kanyonyi. So when you come to visit us one day, I hope you will, that's the view from my office. It's a really beautiful view, isn't it? And inside here, you can see one side of Bwindi to the other. This forest is only 321 square kilometers. But it generates 60% of the revenue for the Uganda Wildlife Authority that takes care of 22 protected areas in Uganda. The mountain gorillas are really helping Uganda tourism to come back on the map like it was in the 60s. And so inside this forest, you don't only have gorillas, but you have chimpanzees, elephants, pangolins, which are all endangered species. You also have the duiker and the bush pig, and you have over 300 species of birds and 200 species of butterfly, and it's a very important water catchment area and climate modulator. So we have 3 integrated programs: wildlife conservation with a focus on wildlife health and habitat conservation, community health with a focus on One Health, where you look at the health of, we improve the health of the people, the animals, and the environment together, and alternative livelihoods, which is a program we began 10 years ago because we were concerned that people were unhealthy because they're poor. So we started to support coffee farmers around the park. And actually, my husband Lawrence said, why don't we develop a global coffee brand to save gorillas through coffee? So here's the Gorilla Conservation Coffee. And we started to support farmers bordering the park. So we trained the rangers to monitor the health of the gorillas, also by identifying them. And every month, every habituated gorilla group, we collect samples from them to see if they have parasites of their own, or they're picking them up from people or livestock. And we built a Gorilla Health and Community Conservation Center. Over here is the former US ambassador to Uganda in our first temporary center we built. We got funding from USAID through African Wildlife Foundation, and he visited with his wife, Susie. And then on the right, we have students from UK and US who are looking at parasites and stress hormone in gorillas, with our 3rd founder member, Stephen, training them. We also have had students from India. This is a young student called Divya. So we host students from around the world to learn about our One Health approach to conservation. And what we are finding that over time, as community health improves, gorillas are falling sick less often from diseases in the local community, which is something that we were aiming to do, and we're continuing to do, and we're excited about that. So gorillas can share water sources with people as well. And so we look at diseases like Giardia. How many of you here have ever had Giardia? Yeah, it's a really awful disease. You feel like you're about to die. You get really dehydrated. And it's a disease that we found in the gorillas, we found it in the livestock, we found it in the people. Sometimes water sources like this, you know, the cattle come in there, the people collect water from here, and the gorillas come through here. And so we train the farmers to dig cattle water troughs, and people to only collect water from clean water sources, and also to boil their water. And we train community conservation animal health workers to really educate the cattle keepers about this. So we did a study, and we found that over time, Giardia was reducing in the gorillas, especially in areas where community health was improving. And this was published in Frontiers for Public Health. Now, gorillas still go outside into people's gardens because the number of mountain gorillas is growing due to successful conservation efforts. And what can we do to try and prevent such happening? People feeling that their property is being destroyed, and gorillas picking up diseases from the community, and even community members can also pick up diseases from the gorillas. So we engage community members in conservation. It's not enough just to work with the park staff. And here we're training them to collect samples from the night nest. Those are the human gorilla conflict team. We call them gorilla guardians. And then on the right, we engage a lot of women in conservation because of our One Health approach to conservation. Basically, women in Uganda are mainly concerned with healthcare and men with conservation. But because of our approach that brings the two together, we have the opportunity to engage women in conservation, which is really amazing. And so here we have Rehema on the right. She's trained 3 other volunteers. They go to people's homes and they talk about good health and hygiene, having hand washing stations, adopting family planning so they have the children they can manage. They talk about sustainable agriculture because it's a very steep area. And they also talk about how they can access ecotourism revenue, amongst other things. So in 2007, we started off with 26, and now by 2020, we're now engaging as 10 times as many village health and conservation teams who are reaching 40,000 people in 7,000 homes. I'm glad that through this opportunity, women can get up and stand and give presentations. The first time I went to the communities when I was working at the Wildlife Authority, the ranger told me The women are whispering, we have to educate our daughters. Look at her, she's standing up and speaking, leading a team of men and giving a presentation. Because at the time, no women spoke. They were very quiet. So I'm glad that through our approach, women are able to stand up and really engage their communities as leaders. And so we talk to them about family planning, having manageable families, so that we talk about the bad family and the good family. This is something we learned from the health sector. So the bad family has too many children, they can't give them, half of them are going to school, half of them are staying behind to chase wildlife from the garden, sadly. So they'll never really have a future. And when the gorillas come out, they try and chase them themselves, and there's some injuries, potential for disease transmission between people and gorillas. And later on, their children are arrested in the park with their father. Some of them die early, teenage pregnancies, and it's very sad. Then the good family plan to have children before they get married. How many they will have? They have like 4 children, which in this part of Uganda is pretty good. And, from 10 to 4. And they all go to school, and when the gorillas come out, the human-gorilla conflict team are pulled out to chase them back safely. Later on, the boy becomes a ranger, the girl becomes a nurse, they're at the graduation party. And of course, most people want to be the good family, where everything works out. And this is really helping to change behavior. The most popular contraceptive was the injection, which through a partnership with Family Health International, we were able to get community health workers who were engaging, and we now call them village health and conservation teams, to safely give injections in the comfort of their home, so that they don't have to get pregnant and have children they didn't want and are not able to manage. And this eventually became a national policy. We're among their 5 pilot sites, and it was very exciting to see research to policy happening, and FHI has taken it to other countries around the world where they're working, including Green Belt Movement, where they're working with the late Professor Wangari Maathai's NGO. And we started to sustain them with group livestock projects, which they requested for. Some got goats, some of them got cows. And then when CARE came along, promoting village saving and loan associations, we just came one day and found that Peace had developed a passbook for VSLAs, and she had put our logo on. And so now some of them are able to double their income through the VSLAs, and which is exciting, the income they get from selling milk and things like that. And some of them are able to lend money. So within that small setup, they're able to keep themselves going without a salary, which is very exciting. And I think in this kind of conference, you can understand the impact of microfinance. So we've continued with the Depo-Povera with support from Population Connection, which is amazing because of things like VSLAs. We've also done a similar program in DRC where people are much poorer. If you can see the grass-thatched huts. When I started out in Bwindi 30 years ago, most people had grass-thatched huts, but now majority of people are having permanent houses because of the impact of tourism. It's really lifting people out of poverty. And we've done a number of research studies that led to policy change. And we've presented at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And this particular student, Alison, was interviewing tourists to see if they're willing to wear masks. This was in 2010. People would get really close to gorillas, they're not wearing masks, and it was becoming a big issue. And later on, that became a policy. So we're really excited that the number of mountain gorillas is continuing to grow because of successful conservation efforts. And as you can see from here, in 1981, there were 254 because the Bwindi population had not yet been discovered. But in 1997, we counted 300 gorillas. I participated in that very first gorilla census, which was amazing, but very, very, very tiring. We counted them by counting their night nests and being able to tell which gorilla families we were seeing. And the numbers have steadily increased. The last census was in 2018, where we counted 459 in Bwindi, 604 in Virungas, to make a total of 1,063. Thank you. The next census in Bwindi is this month, actually, end of this month, beginning of next month. It's supposed to be once every 5 years to fit in with the interbirth interval of gorillas that have babies once every 4.5 years. They are much better than us at birth spacing, family planning, because by the time the new baby comes along, the other one is able to build his his own nest and help to babysit the younger one. And I always tell the public health audience that gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans can teach us about birth spacing because they're much more logical. And by that time, the older one is emotionally independent of mom. And so I'm going to end by talking about sustaining conservation. How do you sustain conservation beyond grants? Gorilla Conservation Coffee is a way that we can do it. It's a global premium coffee brand that we developed in 2015 to save gorillas through coffee. Whenever I was going to check on the gorillas, we often cross coffee farms, and they'll stop and tell tourists, this is a coffee tree. Most tourists have never seen a coffee tree. They only have seen coffee in a cafe or in a supermarket. And so we worked with the lead farmers to try and create a global coffee brand where we give the farmers an above market price for good coffee. It has to be good, premium or specialty, which is possible in this part of Uganda. And a donation from every bag sold goes to support the local community, improving community health, gorilla conservation, gorilla health. So it's a sustainable kind of way. We're developing sustainable financing for conservation. And to show you how good the coffee is, in California, it was among the top 30 coffees, number 29 out of 30 in 2018, that they reviewed around the world with 92 points. So we know that in Uganda, we have wonderful coffee. Uganda is known for coffee and gorillas. I think everyone knows that Uganda is one of the top coffee producing countries in Africa. And so we're combining the two. And the coffee is available at our gorilla conservation cafes in Tebe Airport if you're not able to go to the gorillas before you leave, but also in the airport in Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta Airport, through Safari Lounge Partnership, and on the website in the US, New Zealand, and UK. So gorilla tourism. This is the last part I'm going to talk about. In 2011, people were visiting gorillas. They'll show you that that's the distance you had to be, 7 meters. And these tourists were actually following the regulations. But we did a study and found that 60% of the time, the tourists were getting closer than even 3 meters to the gorillas, and 40% of the time, the gorillas broke the rules. So, because they're used to people and they're curious. And this became a big issue during the COVID pandemic, a very big issue. So we advocated for the upgrading of the Great Ape Viewing regulations, which IUCN and Gorilla Pathology Specialist Group also advocated for. And so if you visit gorillas and you're sick, your temperature's taken, you're not allowed to visit, you have to put on a mask. This happened the day that 2 days after COVID reached Uganda in March 2020. We advocated that everyone should put on masks when they visit the gorillas. And this has remained. It's continued beyond COVID because they're being protected by respiratory diseases. And during the pandemic, gorillas picked up less flu because people were wearing masks. And we carried out a lot of education and testing, both of gorillas and people, working with local partners. We trained people to put on masks, to keep a social distance, who were considered essential workers. And they really got into it, the gorilla guardians, the village health and conservation teams. But sadly, during the COVID crisis, because the local economy went down all over the world, tourists were not traveling, poaching went up, people were hungry, and this gorilla Rafiki was killed by a hungry bushmeat poacher. A very sad day for conservation. He was called Rafiki because he's friendly. It means friendly in Swahili. And he was one of the first gorillas to be habituated, his group, in the southern sector of Bwindi, which started tourism after the northern sector. And so, as you can see, this poacher was not going after gorillas, he was going after bush pigs and duiker. So when he speared the bush pig screamed, and the gorilla attacked to protect his family, and he speared the gorilla out of self-defense. So the poacher went to jail for 11 years for killing the gorilla, the bush pig, and duiker, which was a victory for conservation, but we were worried that as long as there are more hungry poachers, because they were using money from tourism to buy food, and there's no tourism, we're going to get more cases of gorillas being killed. So we met with the poachers, and this time we met their wives. Some of them brought their wives, and we found out that the women urged their husbands to enter the forest when people are hungry. And so we started a program of distributing fast-growing seedlings. But we checked on Rafiki's group 1 month later, and this particular porter who I took with me, because no one had been working for 4 or 5 months because of COVID. And so he was happy to get a job that day. I paid him to carry my bag to the gorillas. And he had a mask saying, "In memory of Rafiki," because most of the community members were very unhappy about what happened. And we got there, and the group had already been split because the leader had left. Some had gone to another group. They had reduced from 17 to 11. And we felt that we needed now to provide fast-growing seedlings. So far we provided to over 3,000 households, including the poacher's wife. She was a beneficiary because she was really, really poor when we met her. She's only 22 years old with 3 children under the age of 3, and she was really struggling. And so they are able to have something to eat. And we don't like to just give out pocho like the government was doing during COVID, because that's really unsustainable. You need to be giving them, not just giving them maize meal, but actually making sure that they have something that can keep them going. So a lot of them are able to provide, to get the seedlings from one season to the next season. And they told us when we distributed questionnaires to about 1,000 people, the first 1,000 households, majority said people are poaching because they're hungry. So this is another program that we're continuing beyond COVID. We started to engage, we started a new way of measuring our impact by developing 12 ideal indicators and trying to make sure that people who have 4 out of 12 are red homes, 8 out of 12 are orange, and between 9 and 12 are green homes. And we're moving homes from red to green so that they can improve over time. So people are saying, you know, CTPH has been in this area for all these years. Are the communities changing? Of course they are, through measuring all of this. And we found that now that we're engaging 430 village health and conservation teams, reaching over 50,000 people in over 10,000 homes, we started off with 23% green homes, and now 2 years later, we're finding that it's more than double to 58%. So we're excited that as community health and well-being is improving, we're now checking to see how the threats to the gorillas are reducing, and we have a more holistic way of measuring impact. When you visit Bwindi, you're going to be told to wear a mask. Responsible tourism. You have to put on a mask, you have to follow the instructions of the guide. It's not about you just getting close to the gorillas and getting a selfie, but it's about visiting these very important species and making sure they're around forever. And we also encourage tourists to buy a craft from the local community, because when you buy a craft, that community member is much less likely to poach. And so we launched a policy brief on responsible tourism to great apes for 13 countries in Africa which have gorilla and chimpanzee tourism. The most tourism is in Uganda and Rwanda, and Tanzania, where Dr. Jane Goodall is. The rest of Africa is trying to develop gorilla tourism in the 13 countries at 33 sites, and we want them to all have the same standards. So this was launched in Kigali, and the policy brief is in English and French. And we had 2 operators also presenting, Praveen from Volcanoes and Manzi from Wilderness Tours, and conservationists, wardens and conservationists. We are excited to be engaging women in conservation and hosted students from Duke to see the role of women in conservation. The first day we wore masks. That particular ranger, Goretti, came with me to make sure that everything will be fine. And it was a really great day. So I'm a member of the Women for Environment Africa Leadership Council, where we initiated this particular project in order to mentor more women to become leaders in conservation. We're excited that more women are getting involved in conservation, but there's hardly any women leaders, especially in Africa and the global south. And so working with conservationists all over Africa, in Kenya, Mozambique, Rwanda, we started We Africa. And we're mentoring, every year we mentor women, 25 women each year, and we've reached to about 100 women now, so that they can realize their potential. If they're going to head wildlife authorities or NGOs, they should be able to. We're also strengthening African leadership in primate research and conservation, where we find that you go to conferences like the International Primate Society Conference, they're talking about primates in Africa, but only 10% of the people there are from Africa, where the primates are found, indigenous people. And so we are promoting local leadership, and we hosted the second conference in 2019 in Entebbe. And it was a great conference. The Japanese ambassador was there, the Minister of Tourism was the guest of honor. And it was really good because now we are strengthening African leadership in primate research and conservation so that they can lead conservation efforts and not have to rely on other people from other countries so that the numbers can keep going up faster. Because in many areas, primate numbers are going down. We were excited to host the US ambassador, the former US ambassador, Natalie Brown. She became a big advocate for mask wearing and put it on Twitter. The reason why there's so many people in that photograph, because you only allowed 8 people per gorilla group per day, and they went in turns, is because she found out that the US Embassy, none of her staff had ever seen gorillas. And she insisted that she wants her fellow Ugandan staff to also have this experience. And so mountain gorillas are completely adorable, and you hope you get to visit them. My son Tendo wrote something on World Gorilla Day, COVID-19 and gorillas, when he was 11, accompanying me to many workshops. And finally, when he turned 15, he got to see the gorillas this January. And we tried to publicize it through the local TV, UBC TV and New Vision, so that people know that it's a cool thing to do when you turn 15. Because most of the tourists in Bwindi are not from Uganda, although it's much cheaper for Ugandans to visit the gorillas. It's $800 for foreign non-residents and $80 for Ugandans and other East African residents. And his older brother, Indigo, wrote a book, Zookeeper for a Week, when he spent a week at the zoo. And it won a Moonbeam Children's Book Award, which we're very excited about. So we're beginning to engage children in conservation much more through STEM. And we're happy to get funding from National Geographic. They're collecting rubbish, because there are lots of lodges now, and they're collecting rubbish and making proper rubbish heaps. And we also provided them with livestock, because a lot of them will tell you that their parents poach because they don't have enough animal protein. So we're promoting that in schools. I was excited to become a UN Champion of the Earth in Science and Innovation, where I talked about needing more local champions because they become the decision makers. A lot of people are in conservation and then they don't make them leaders, then they go into other professions, and then we have debates in parliament in Uganda to cut down trees to plant sugarcane. And yet if you have more members of parliament who care about conservation, you won't have to have these debates. I was excited to be on BBC 100 Women list in 2023. And last week, Christiana Figueroa, who many of you may know, who started the Climate Corps, she was there as well. She was one of the people who hosted us for a retreat last week. I was excited to get an honorary doctorate for my old vet school, which was fantastic, and to get an award from the President of Uganda. What you can do, spread the word about our work, visit us. I was happy that Sonia visited us, and James is going to visit us this week, partner with us. I know that banks have managed donor advised funds to see where people can, small foundations, small family foundations can support initiatives like this. Sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, make a donation through our website. We currently want to expand the protected habitat for mountain gorillas in Uganda because the number of gorillas is growing, but the space isn't growing. So the gorillas are coming more and more into conflict with people, as you saw all through the presentation, and the conflict is increasing. And yet many tour lodges are being set up, and they're locking the gorillas in. So over 300 landowners want to sell their land. They've told us they've signed a free prior informed consent, but now we're raising money in order to buy that land so that the gorilla habitat can increase and the numbers can double and triple. And we want to continue to scale the One Health model. Please follow us on social media. You can do research with us. We've also hosted business school students as well. Buy the coffee and buy the book. It's here in Uganda and all over the world. I was very excited that Tom was able to also do an endorsement for my book, which you read when you go online. Thank you so much, Tom, for supporting the initiative. It was actually supposed to be one of the endorsements on the cover, but it came a bit late. But it's still online, and it's a really, really beautiful endorsement. Thank you so much, Tom. We hosted the Queen of Buganda to visit the gorillas, another local champion. And through that, we're getting more Ugandans visiting the gorillas. She's the patron of conservation through public health and officially launched our Gorilla Health and Community Conservation Center. You can donate also through Wildlife Conservation Network. And We look forward to hosting you at Bwindi. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gladys.